Yeah, hello everybody. Here is Two Brothers and Bitcoin with the amazing Chad McBain and myself, Luke McBain. Chad, $100,000 per Bitcoin. Is that
Yeah.
news? Is it newsworthy to talk about this, or are we already at a stage where we go like, oh my goodness, okay, well, Bitcoin keeps on getting more and more expensive. We're getting used to that. Yeah, but it's sort of newsworthy because it's a nice number, 100,000 per Bitcoin, right? But
Yeah.
what's
Yeah.
going on?
Human beings like round numbers.
Yeah, it's like it's impressive. Oh, 100,000.
Yeah.
Nice.
Um, yeah, 99,850 wasn't good enough last week. So, but 100,000, that makes all the difference in the world. So, yeah, look, it's an amazing milestone when you think about, where Bitcoin was 15, 16 years ago. But even 2 years ago,
Hmm.
you and I talk about this, that these bit of a roller coaster ride if you're a long-term Bitcoin investor. But at the end of the day, there's always higher highs and higher lows. And so to see it hit 100,000 didn't surprise me. I didn't know when it would hit 100,000, but I just assumed at some point it would, for all kinds of network effect reasons that we talk about here. But I think, yeah, it's a nice number, and I think it's a number that now captures the eyes maybe of a lot more people. And we joke, but for some reason, round numbers do capture our attention, and 100,000 is a number that I think a lot of people start to take notice of. So in some ways, that's really good, because as we discussed, Bitcoin is not about getting rich. Bitcoin is about protecting your earning power, your energy. You put out all this work and all this effort, and it gets devalued and degraded by central banks and fiat currency at, well, they say between 2 and 4% a year. I would say probably double whatever they say. And Bitcoin is an opportunity, hopefully, to protect that. And so I think it's great to see that. So $100,000 is a number that might capture more people's attention. Having said that, I know a lot of people will think, well, I'm too late, you know. But the only reason you're too late is if you think it's about getting rich. If you actually look at it as a way to protect your earning power, then you're never too late.
Hmm.
So I would suggest to people that fear that they need to put more research into Bitcoin because it's not. Look, the people that arrived early, yes, they're going to do wealth. They're going to do well from a wealth perspective, but it's really about protecting your earnings. So Bitcoin can go to $1 million. That doesn't matter. The point is it will always beat inflation, and that's the key, you know, provided you hold it long enough. Yeah, you have to look at it in 4 or 5 year things. It's an investment for now in your future. So I love the 100,000. I think it's going to go much higher over the next little while, but I could be completely wrong. Um, but it's gone from what, a high of 20,000 7 8 years ago to a high of 69,000 4 years ago to now 100,000. Um, the highs just keep getting higher. So
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like in the last bull run, there was this hype, and also the hype, like, oh, it's gonna go to 100,000. It didn't go to 100,000, but it went to what, 69,000.
yeah.
And also, I remember Elon Musk buying Bitcoin and tweeting to the moon, like really this hysteria about the Bitcoin, and then it sort of crashed quite substantially down to, I don't know, 40 and then 30 something. Yeah, and I think I don't know how it's going to go this time. I mean, again, we're not giving investment advice, but it seems like back then the 100,000 would have been amazing or mind-blowing
Right.
or some sort of hyper news,
Yeah.
and everybody was just. And then when it crashed, everybody, not everybody, but a lot of news would say, "See, it's not working. It's everybody's broke." Ha 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 ha. And again, you had this scan around FTX and so on and so forth. So I wonder where we're going now, because hypothetically speaking, I just saw another analysis. by somebody who's called Plan B, who has the stock to flow model, who says, well, we could see a multiple now of 100,000 in this bull run cycle. If the pattern is the same, that we say now, okay, now is the beginning of the bull run. Actually, we're not even in the full bull run. It is just the beginning. If we compare it to last time, we saw a multiple happening in the bull run itself, going to 69. So this could be just the beginning of something, because we're not really yet in the hype. We're in the beginning of some little bit of hype, but the hype might just come.
Yeah. So I look at that in a couple of ways. Number one is what I like about this particular set of circumstances that we find ourselves in is, and I think you nailed it with hype. The last two bull runs that I've been aware of were 2017 and 2021, and both of them were hype. So, in my opinion, the price was driven by a lot of people, maybe even like you and I, that were like, "Oh, I can make some money." And so the demand was really from speculating and driving up the price, in my opinion. Uh, However, starting in 2020, 2021, we started to see the first institutions starting to buy into Bitcoin and therefore acquire and hold it. And when I look at where we're at today, in my opinion, this isn't hype, at least not yet, because this price is almost all of it is from institutional buying, not from the average person, what we call retail consumer. It's not from their hype. So that's kind of I think that's a good thing. I think we've now got a solid bedrock that maybe wasn't there, 3, 4 years ago. Um, Now, as far as Plan B and a stock to flow, I'm not, and again, this is not investment advice. I'm not a fan of Plan B stock to flow model for a variety of reasons. I think there's something to it, but he's been wrong a lot. And I just think people need to temper their expectations. I believe, not investment advice, that Bitcoin will continue to go higher, but I also think there will be moments in time where it's going to drop considerably. And so that's why I say people, when they invest in it, for now, it's not a currency. For now, it is a long-term investment strategy, in my opinion. And it's a commodity. I mean, that's what it is. I do believe it'll be a currency at some point when the price stabilizes. So when I look at it, I'm a little bit more tempered. Do I think it could go to 200,000 US dollars in this bull run with all the institutional investment? And it now appears to be even sovereign wealth and nation states getting involved. Yeah, I think that it could even go higher than that. But if it doesn't, I think it's still fine, as you said earlier, at 100,000 or 120,000 or at 80,000 or at 70,000. I mean, it's growing, it's maturing, and it's like anything, it takes time. But we're definitely, I think the Bitcoin network now, there's I think over 400 million wallets globally. You know, 4 years ago there was about 100 million. 4 years before that it was about 50 million. Like, so you're starting to see the network effect take place. The more people that adopt it, the more stable that pricing will be. So we'll see where it ends up. I'm optimistic. Full disclosure, but I do worry sometimes when I see things like Plan B's model being displayed all the time, because he had us going to $1 million or $500,000 last bull run, and I don't know what it was the one before that. I'm not sure that stock to flow is the best way to measure adoption or future pricing, I guess is. There's so many things involved in Bitcoin now. You've got futures trading, you've got the ETFs. So there's a lot of things that can affect the balance of that pricing that I don't think stock to flow takes into account. However, I could be completely wrong, because I know there's a lot of people smarter than I am that do believe in the stock to flow method. So we'll see.
I mean, it's always good to say some words of caution. Nobody of us can predict the future. although there are again these indications that it will go beyond 100,000 in the next couple of months, and maybe even up to 200,000. Who knows? But yeah, I just say then, well, if we are going to repeat the past in some way, then that we're in it also, like again for this roller coaster
Right.
experience,
Yeah.
and so I think you got to be aware of that. And I also tell people I personally know, I say, well, don't look at it short term, look at it long term. Now, even if the roller coaster comes and then we drop down, I don't know, to 90,000 again or whatever, you just have to go with that, and you have to go with the long term outlook of this.
Yeah.
And a long
Yeah.
term, there seems to be no stopping it. Like there's just yeah.
Yeah. And like I always use, the example, um, when I looked at it, when my wife and I looked at it, she decided she wanted to invest, and it was with a 5-year outlook, which for us, real estate is my profession. Um, whenever I counsel clients or whatever, it's always with a 5, 7 to 10 year outlook, you know. Um, and we approached that ourselves with that. So it was just natural for us to look at Bitcoin or any investment that way. And so we're um, we're now just past year 4, and so a friend of mine, little segue, a little story here, but a friend of mine called me a couple of years ago. So Bitcoin, as you said, had gotten up to 69,000, and then it slowly retraced all the way back. And these are U.S. dollars, of course, that I'm quoting. Um, it retraced all the way back to 15,600. Um, and he called me when it was about 17,500, and he said, "What are you guys going to do? Are you going to get rid of your Bitcoin?" And he'd asked me that a couple of times previously, and I said, "No." I said, because we believe, we've done a lot of research and we believe in the future of this and its long-term destiny and outlook. And he said, "Well, you're crazy." And I said, "Well, at the end of the day, we looked at it with a long-term, a 4 or 5, it was a 5-year outlook. So I said, this is no point to judge it. We're only 2 years into the 5-year. And of course, here we are now, we're 4 years into the 5-year, or almost 4.5. And so, it's the same thing though. We're not quite at the 5-year, but thankfully we had a plan and we stuck to that, because if you'd have looked at it at 2 years and thought this is crazy, now you'd be like, oh my gosh, what did I do? And I would say the same thing about any long-term investment. If somebody buys a house at the height of any real estate market and then sells it during the down cycle, they're going to think that real estate is a horrible investment. But everybody knows that if you just hold your real estate long enough, and I'm leaving out acts of God or war. But most normal situations for people, if you hold real estate long enough, you'll always do fine. I don't know if you'll get rich on it, but you'll certainly do better than those that don't own real estate. Um, so I look at it that way, and that's how I view Bitcoin. So I think people just need to, you and I keep talking about this all the time. Do some research, do some research, do some research. Read the Bitcoin Standard, look at podcasts like ours and many others. Try and find ones that are actually talking about Bitcoin education, not about, hey, you can make all this money and blah, 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 blah. That's not really what this is about. So I'm excited. I'm happy. I like the nice figure of 100K. I personally believe that over the next, let's say, 6 months, it will at some point be higher than that. Um, but at the same time, if it went down to 70,000 next week, I wouldn't be shocked by that. I would be surprised, but not shocked. Um, so we'll see what happens. But like I said earlier, we're experiencing higher highs, but here's the key: higher lows. I don't believe Bitcoin's ever going back down to, I don't know, $10,000 or $3,000. I don't even think it'll go down to $20,000 ever again. I think there's too much institutional adoption and too much global network adoption. So we'll see what happens. But it's exciting and it's fun times. And for one moment, one podcast, we could pat yourselves on the back and say, yeah, good job, everybody. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. I mean, I had a similar conversation in the last downturn. Just by chance, I was sitting in a coffee shop and somebody came by and I didn't know this person. We just started talking about Bitcoin for whatever reason. And he said, well, he had a friend who invested and then in the last cycle it crashed and then he got rid of all his Bitcoin and now he regrets it. Like even regrets it
Right.
now in the downturn. Like he just, what did I do to myself? So yeah, that was a sign for me that these things seem to happen fairly drastically also in this market. And maybe again, but yeah, as you said, also don't believe down to the same low. I don't see that going ever again to 10,000 or maybe 20 even. I don't see that happening.
I've seen some people have posted some tweets from 2014, which are very interesting because that's 10 years ago. People saying, "Oh, I bought Bitcoin at $1 and I sold it at $8, and oh, now it's 300. I shouldn't have sold it." And so we look back at tweets from 10 years ago, and they're talking about tens of dollars or hundreds of dollars, and now we're like, "Oh my God, it's $100,000." You know. And that's in US dollars. In Canadian dollars, I looked, it was 144. And in Australian dollars, it was over 160. So 10 years ago, the Canadian dollar was much stronger against the US dollar, and so is the Australian dollar. So not only do you have the appreciation in the value of Bitcoin, but the devaluation of all of these currencies against the US dollar. And then you add on top of that that the US is devaluing their own dollar with all the money printing. It's amazing. What I'm probably getting off on a tangent, but my favorite thing about learning about Bitcoin is actually what it's taught me about how the system works,
Hmm.
how the global financial system works. And I now think I have a decent understanding of it. And I just think, oh, we're all just so naive, even even ignorant. But I don't think it's willful ignorance. I think that we just don't know what we don't know. I know that's cliched, but my understanding now, I finally feel like, oh, I get it, and this is just a bad situation for everybody, you know.
Yeah, and back to the 100,000 and the fluctuations, like once you sort of understand, and maybe this is already a commonplace, maybe some people still don't quite understand it, is this is the only thing where there is a limited supply on basically on this earth because as you say sometimes okay, maybe this earth is limited, but we're going to travel to Mars and there will be other planets and comets and all that, and maybe they find gold on Mars and some other stuff which is even more valuable, but Bitcoin is really the only thing which is in absolute limited supply. And as we know, by supply and demand, if something is limited, it becomes more valuable if there is a demand, of course.
Yeah,
And that's the part which, in the last, let's say, decade or so, this was still up to debate to say, is there really demand for this? Are people going to agree that this is a store of value, or are they just going to reject it because they say, no, we don't want to store, our wealth on a blockchain. We don't want that. I'd rather have it in gold in my safe or something like that.
yeah.
So that's the only question. So will there be mass adoption of this whole idea that yes, you can store your wealth digitally, and it's limited. So it's the only thing which is certain that this is there and only that is there, and there won't be more of it in the future. And once you sort of get that and this whole supply and demand thing, you go like, yeah, that sort of would make sense that this in the long term, there could be more demand for this. And when looking back and when you see like us, when you're involved more years in the space and you see the continuous acceptance and adoption of this, you go like, okay, this is now going somewhere, like
Yeah.
seriously going somewhere.
This is just in my own mind. I think I look at it like art. There's probably been a demand for art for thousands of years, but art as a commodity, I think, is a fairly, new phenomenon.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know how new. Is it 100 years? Is it 200 years? But certainly 1,000 years ago, people weren't, paying five lifetimes worth of salaries for art. You know, And we're seeing that certainly in the last few decades. And because again, depending on the artist, I think you make a fantastic point. There has to be the demand. Just because something is scarce doesn't mean that it's worth something. Um, but if there's a demand for a certain artist, then we see that price becomes almost no object. Somebody just paid $6 million for a banana taped to a tape. I don't know if you saw that last
Hmm.
week. It was what's it called? The Comedian, I think it's called. Um, Now, I think that's silly, but there was clearly a demand, and the person that bought it for $6.2 million was not the only bidder. So it's not like, oh, that it was just one person. So when there's a demand for something, that changes. Like the scarcity is one thing, but there's the demand for it. And as you so eloquently pointed out, the demand for Bitcoin is increasing exponentially every passing year. And so that's how we arrive at $100,000 when 6, 7 years ago it was below $1,000 at one point, and maybe averaging around $3,000.
To your point
So
about art, I mean, maybe one day we'll have to do a podcast just about art because what sort of blew me away was that there is sometimes we say, okay, Bitcoin has surpassed silver in terms of the store or value, right? It's not there
right,
with gold yet, but art actually is still much bigger than Bitcoin, like in terms of
right,
storing value of
yeah,
people, what people invest in it and as a commodity. And when I saw these figures, I was going, what? Like, what's going on there? What, like, because you always have this image of the starving artist, and it's not, people are reluctant to pay for art and don't want to go to the theater. And I don't know what. People try to sell their paintings and get $200 for a painting or something like that, where you go, how are you going to pay rent with that? But when I saw that actually, yes, it's seen as a store of value, art. It's we got to look into this. This is really strange for me, but it seems to be the case. First of all, of course, it makes sort of sense because art is unique. There's no two pieces of art which are completely identical, except maybe they're digitally produced. But what, of course, makes it a little bit risky is that you never know if it will retain its value. Okay, you might sell the banana for 6 million,
yeah,
but maybe in 2 years everybody will go, no, I'm not paying $6 for that piece of art. Like,
that's right.
what's the whole point? Like, I'm not paying 6 million just because you paid 6 million for it. So, and that's the part I also don't quite understand how they do this valuation, how people who are able to invest money into art are able to make wise decisions so they know that in 10 years, 15 years, there is store of value, there is appreciation, as opposed to Bitcoin, because every Bitcoin is unique and it will stay like that. There's no change. It will always be a Bitcoin in the future. It won't be anything else. And it won't be,
Yeah,
compared to something else. You can't compare it to anything, in fact. Art, there will be always new art, and maybe art will
yes.
go out of fashion and out of taste and all that. So I don't really get the whole thing, the art market. I don't understand
Yeah.
how that works. There must be something.
I I've actually read a book a few years ago. I can't remember what the name is. It's in my library. It's an Audible book, but anyway, it was about basically the business of the art world, and it was fascinating. Um, I don't understand it either, but maybe that's the point. Maybe it's just as you say, if there's a demand for like, there's not a demand for all art. There's the big prices we see are maybe for a few dozen artists, globally. Maybe even a couple of hundred, but certainly, on the millions of artists out there, there's not demand for all their work. So what determines why something is worth something and why something else isn't? I don't know. Which is probably why I don't invest in art because I don't truly understand it. Now, people would say, well, do you understand Bitcoin? And I would say, I understand scarcity, I understand demand, um, and I understand that a decentralized network can't be messed with. You know, art can be fudged in some way. Is it real? Is it a fake? Is it a good copy? All this stuff. You can't really do that with Bitcoin. So for now, as a commodity, I like it as by far as an investment. But I also think that, yeah, there's going to come a point, and I don't know when that is, where when the price stabilizes, we can then start using it as transactional currency, because it is digital and it's global and it's decentralized. Gold has fit that for many thousands of years, but it's still hard to use as a currency. You know, you can use gold coins, but you can only carry so many of them at one time. You're not gonna buy a car with gold coins or a house. So I think the future of Bitcoin is very bright. I can see many decades of usefulness, maybe even centuries. Yeah, just because it's digital. Yeah. So
Yeah,
yeah, we'll
and
have to get in.
yeah, sorry, go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say we'll have to get into the art thing sometime. Yeah.
Yeah, it's mind blowing, and
Yeah.
yeah, and as to your point, yeah, you can't use pieces of art easily to transact anything with them. I mean, that's
No, it's store of
it's,
value. Yeah.
yeah, store of value only, and
Yeah.
then you made either the right choice or you didn't. And with Bitcoin, apparently, due to the continued adoption of it, one can say, yeah, there seems to be a good choice in Bitcoin when you look at long-term store of value. There seems to be something there. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, we'll probably get into that point. The whole decentralization point is that a lot of people also don't get is that it is the only network which is completely decentralized. And probably, I don't know, you never know what's going to happen or what technology might come up, but for now, I don't see that this can be replicated so easily after it has happened once. Like,
Well, not only that, now that governments take it seriously, it's going to be very difficult to get something decentralized at scale ever again because governments don't like decentralized anything.
yeah, yeah,
Uh, and the reason Bitcoin kind of escaped their purview was because for so many years it wasn't interesting to them. It was just funny stuff going on the internet. And so now governments are aware that things can happen on the internet. So I don't think you would get a decentralized protocol network to scale to hundreds of millions of people ever again. That now I could be wrong, but I just think it's much more difficult to replicate that now. The governments are paying attention. You know.
yeah. I just saw an interview with was he like the founder of Netscape or something like that, and he said that at least he's working also in the crypto and AI space, and he said something like, yeah, the governments are now are cracking down hard on anything related to crypto, anything
Mm.
like any startup which wants to deal with crypto, they're monitoring everything very carefully. And there's this whole trend around debanking entrepreneurs who are working on crypto. So
Yeah, so
he's,
that was probably Mark Andreessen
yeah,
from Andreessen Horowitz. I think that's going to change for the next few years in the U.S., which hopefully will also permeate throughout most of the rest of the world. But we'll see. But yeah, up until now, it's been pretty hostile. It wasn't hostile until about 3 or 4 years ago, and I think it was around 2020, 2021 that governments in the West, particularly, started to say, "Hey, there's something to this Bitcoin thing. There's something to this crypto thing." Um, and I think that's when they realized they couldn't control it because it was decentralized. And I think that presents some people, not all, in government. Um, I think that presents a real conundrum because there's some people out there that believe that government should be in control of every aspect of your life. Now, I'm not going to get into the politics of that, but what I would say is decentralized protocols, decentralized platforms present real problems to that thought process. Um, can't be controlled.
yeah, and I'm just well, I'm just speculating here, of course, and I'm saying although there is a lot of positive news around Bitcoin, there's also this happening, and I think it sort of indicates that they go like, okay, we now have to deal with this technology, but we don't necessarily want more of it. Like
Right.
we have to now deal with Bitcoin, and we might have to deal with Tether, or we might have to deal with some projects which are out there, but we don't want this. We don't want more of these projects. We don't want more of these networks, and therefore, yeah, we just don't want that. We were more comfortable dealing with, I don't know, a dozen platforms and that's it. Similar to like I think he made the analogy to social media where they say, okay, we got Facebook, Twitter, or X, and we got YouTube. That's fine, but we don't want more because these platforms we can regulate and control in some way. But when we have, I don't know, 2 dozen platforms, it's too much of a headache. And
Well, I think you're referring to the Joe Rogan interview with Mark Andreessen, and I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said that they went in to talk to the regulators about some AI investments that they have, and they were told not to do them. There was only going to be 3 or 4 winners in AI, and they had already chosen who they were going to be.
right,
Now
right.
that is scary. That a government, now that's changing, because the Trump administration is more open to the tech. But under the last, well, actually, under the current administration, which still has another month and a half or so, yeah, they were going to pick, as you said, 2 or 3 companies that they had good relations with, and everybody else was told to go home. Don't bother investing any money in this space. And to me, that is frightening. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like maybe coming back to Bitcoin. So Bitcoin adoption is there's it seems the attempts to ban Bitcoin and to get rid of it are diminishing. I think there's still probably some countries which are hostile to Bitcoin, but there seems to be like a, how to say it, I don't know, a retreating defense stance here, and but at the same time, okay, we will accept this, but we're not gonna let any other thing come up. So that actually speaks, ironically, also for Bitcoin that it's
Right.
here to stay. Yeah.
And ironically speaks to how valuable Bitcoin probably is, because governments themselves will probably not allow something like it to ever happen again. So because it's already out there in the wild, it almost becomes exponentially more valuable as time goes on, because in theory might be the last remaining thing that they can't do anything about.
Mhm.
So
Except
yeah.
tax
Well,
taxation.
I don't know how much time we have left, but France just introduced a massive tax on Bitcoin, and it's a capital gains tax that's unrealized. So in other words, you don't need to sell your Bitcoin; they're still going to tax you. So it's crazy. I don't know how long that will last, but that's their last line of defense is tax. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot. I think that was a nice excursion into Bitcoin at $100,000. What's the outlook? Where are we right now? How should I, as a normal person, deal with this phenomenon? I think that was a nice summary. So, thanks for that.
No, my pleasure. Anytime.